The city of Vera floated like a silver dream above the clouds, its towers shining with blue light and whispering airships passing between them. Inside one of those towers was a quiet café made of glass and glowing plants. The smell of soft steam and roasted fruit filled the air. It was a place where people came to talk, laugh, and sometimes fall in love. At a small round table near the window sat Lyra, a young alien girl with pale silver skin and bright white eyes that reflected every bit of light. Small metal rings sat behind her ears, hearing implants, but they didn't work perfectly. She was deaf, and most of her life had been full of silence. Yet tonight, she smiled nervously. Waiting for someone special, across from her sat Tovin, a tall alien noble with violet skin and sharp golden horns. He was rich, confident, and loud. He liked being the center of attention, and everyone in the cafe seemed to notice him. Lyra smiled shyly and typed something on her wrist tablet that showed glowing letters between them. "You look nice tonight," she wrote. Tovin looked at the text, smirked, and replied aloud, "You don't need to type that. I can see your lips move." But his voice was filled with annoyance. Not kindness, she tried to respond, speaking softly. But her words came out broken, uneven, because she couldn't hear them herself. A few aliens nearby giggled quietly. Tovin leaned back, rolling his eyes. "You really sound strange, you know that? Couldn't they fix you better?" Lyra's face turned pale. Her fingers shook. She looked down, her heart thumping like a drum she couldn't hear. She typed again, "I try my best," but he didn't even look. He waved his hand, laughing. "Oh, come on. Don't act like that. It's just a joke." More laughter came from the tables around. Her throat tightened. She wished she could disappear. At another table sat a human, a man with a calm face and eyes like stone, Captain Reed, a former engineer, now raising his little daughter Mara alone. They were visiting the Galactic hub for a repair job. Reed had seen many things in this galaxy, but cruelty still hit him the same way every time. He noticed the scene. The way the alien girl's smile was breaking piece by piece. He watched as Tovin mocked her again, pretending to cover his ears, shouting, "Can you even hear me now?" The crowd laughed. Mara looked up at her father, her small hand holding a cup of juice. "Dad, why are they laughing at her?" she whispered. Reed said nothing for a moment. He just stared, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He had seen people mock others for being weak, different, or human. But this was worse. Lyra blinked fast, her eyes filling with silent tears. The words around her were noise. She couldn't understand them, but she could feel the vibration of laughter in the air. Like knives cutting into her chest, she stood up quietly, bowing her head, and signed a small apology to Tovin with her hands. He scoffed, "Don't bother. It's not like anyone here wants to date a broken signal." That was the moment Reed moved. His chair scraped against the glass floor as he stood. The cafe's sound faded, not because it became quiet, but because everyone could feel the weight of his presence. His daughter looked up at him. "Dad?" she whispered. Reed walked slowly toward Lyra's table, his boots heavy, his coat brushing the floor. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply placed his hand on the back of Lyra's chair and looked at Tovin. "Apologize," he said calmly. The noble blinked. "Excuse me, human? Do you know who I am?" Reed's voice stayed even. "I know what you are," he said. "Someone laughing at another person because they're different. That's all I need to know." A hush spread through the cafe. Even the serving drones paused in midair. Tovin laughed nervously. "You think you can lecture me? You humans always think you're heroes. You fight wars, break worlds, and then act noble." Reed didn't answer. He took off his jacket and gently placed it over Lyra's shoulders. Her eyes widened in confusion. She tried to speak, but he shook his head softly, letting her know she didn't need to. Then he turned back to Tovin. You talk about perfection, but maybe you should learn how to listen first. The noble's face darkened. You'll regret this, human, he hissed, standing up, towering over Reed, but Reed didn't move. His calmness was heavier than any threat. The noble finally grabbed his drink and threw a few credits on the table before storming out. The door hissing behind him, silence followed, true silence. Lyra looked down at the jacket around her shoulders. Feeling its warmth, she looked at Reed, then at the little girl beside him. The human smiled gently and signed two simple words she could understand. You're safe. For the first time that night, Lyra smiled, not shyly, not nervously, but with relief. The laughter in the café had vanished, replaced by something heavier. Something real. Reed sat back with Mara, the girl smiling proudly at her father. Lyra stayed seated, still wearing his coat. And for the first time in her life, silence felt like peace, not punishment. The café was still and heavy. Like the air after a storm, no one dared to speak. The laughter that once filled the room was gone. Replaced by guilt and fear, Lyra sat frozen, her fingers tight around the edge of the table. Her heart beat so fast she could feel it shaking in her throat. The warmth of the human's coat rested on her shoulders. It felt strange, kind, something she wasn't used to. Captain Reed stood tall beside her, not saying another word. His calm face showed no anger, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. Every alien in the café could feel it. That silent power that humans carried, not strength of body, but strength of soul. The manager, a small insectoid alien, buzzed nervously, trying to act polite. Sir, please, we don't want trouble here. Reed turned to him and said softly, Then teach your customers respect. The words hit harder than a shout. The manager lowered his head and nodded quickly. Lyra looked up at Reed, her lips parting slightly. She tried to sign something, her fingers trembling, but he only smiled and shook his head, mouthing the words slowly so she could read them. It's okay. He didn't understand sign language well, but he understood pain, and that was enough, Mara. His little daughter tugged at his sleeve. Dad, she whispered, you helped her, right? Reed knelt down and smiled at her. We help when no one else does, remember? She nodded, proud, her eyes glowing under the café lights. Around them, the crowd began to move again, whispers spreading like soft wind. Some looked away in shame. Others stared at the human with silent curiosity. In this part of the galaxy, few aliens saw humans act this way. Many saw them as cold, emotionless warriors. But this man looked nothing like that. He was quiet, gentle, but unbreakable. Reed turned back to Lyra, typing on his wrist device, so the words could float in the air between them. Are you okay? She nodded slightly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Then she typed back, Why did you help me? Reed read the words and smiled. Because someone should have, he replied. Silence should never mean weakness. Lyra blinked, her lips forming a faint smile. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her like that. But before she could type her next message, a sudden shadow fell across their table. The noble alien Tovin had returned. His golden eyes glowed with fury, and two armored guards stood behind him. So this is the mighty human hero, Tovin sneered, his voice sharp like glass. You think you can humiliate me in front of my own people? Reed didn't rise from his seat. He simply looked at him and said, You humiliated yourself. The crowd froze again. Every movement stopped. Tovin's guards stepped forward, their armor gleaming red. Apologize, one hissed. But Reed stayed silent. Mara hid behind him. Clutching his coat, Lyra stood too. Shaking but refusing to sit, the noble smiled cruelly. I could have you arrested for insulting a noble, he said. Or maybe I'll just let my guards teach you some manners. Reed finally stood. Slow and calm, his height didn't match their size. But something in his presence made them hesitate. He looked at Tovin and said in a steady voice, "You can scare everyone else here, but you won't scare me." His hand rested protectively on Mara's shoulder, then pointed gently at Lyra. "And you will not speak to her again." The guards reached for their weapons. But before they could draw, a low hum filled the café. Lyra's implants glowed bright blue. She raised her hand, and a pulse of silent energy rippled through the air, knocking one guard off balance. Everyone gasped. She had activated her resonance amplifier, a device used only by deaf combat veterans to feel and control sound vibrations. Tovin stumbled back, shouting, "You dare use weapons in my presence?" Lyra's eyes blazed with light. She signed quickly toward Reed. "Run!" But he didn't move instead. Reed placed his hand on her arm and shook his head gently. "No," he said softly. "We don't run from bullies." The human's calmness spread through her like a wave. Her fear began to fade, replaced by something new, courage. Then suddenly, a deep voice came from the corner. "That's enough." The cafe manager stood trembling but firm, calling for the city patrol. The sound of boots and drones filled the air, and within seconds, the guards froze, blue stasis lights wrapping around them. Tovin shouted angrily as the patrol let him out. "This isn't over, human." Reed sighed, shaking his head. "It never is," he murmured. When the cafe was quiet again, Reed turned to Lyra, typing a final line on his wrist device. "Come sit with us." She hesitated, then nodded slowly, following him to his table. She sat across from little Mara. The girl smiled and handed her a small piece of sweet bread. "It's good," Mara said, pointing to her mouth. Lyra laughed silently and took a bite. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt seen. The cafe lights warmed again. The city glowed beyond the glass. And as the three of them sat together, a new story began, one built on kindness, courage, and the quiet power of those who refused to stay silent. The cafe slowly returned to life, but the moment still stayed heavy in the air. Everyone pretended to talk again, yet their eyes kept drifting toward the strange trio, the human, his small daughter, and the deaf alien girl who had just faced down a noble. Lyra sat quietly at the table, her hands still shaking a little. But there was a softness in her face now. For the first time in years, someone had stood beside her. Not out of pity, but out of respect, Captain Reed sat opposite her, his daughter Mara between them. The little girl smiled wide, holding out a small cup of juice toward Lyra. "For you," she said slowly. Moving her lips clearly so Lyra could read them, Lyra smiled, her silver eyes glowing faintly under the neon light. She mouthed the words back, "Thank you," and then typed them on her wrist device to make sure the girl could see. Reed watched the two silently, a hint of warmth crossing his face. He hadn't seen Mara this happy in a long time. After his wife's death, the galaxy had seemed cold, full of machines and noise, but this quiet exchange felt like a piece of something human returning. Lyra finally looked at him, her fingers moving as she typed slowly. "You risked trouble for me." Reed read the glowing text and replied by typing back, "I don't like bullies," then added, "You didn't deserve that." She hesitated, then wrote, "I get used to it," and smiled sadly. "People don't like when I talk funny." Reed shook his head. "It's not you that's broken." He wrote, "It's them." Lyra blinked, her throat tightening. No one had ever said that to her before. In her world, deafness meant weakness. Silence meant shame. But this human spoke as if her silence was strength, not failure. Mara tapped Lyra's hand excitedly, showing her something on a small holoscreen. It was a tiny translator toy shaped like a bird, The girl giggled and pressed a button. And the bird repeated a robotic phrase. "Friend, friend." Lyra laughed. A soft, soundless laugh that shone through her eyes. Reed smiled. Leaning back, he typed again. "She lost her mother a year ago." Lyra looked at the little girl, her expression softening. "I lost my family too," she replied. In a mining explosion, Reed paused, his gaze sharpening. "The Sane Noble's company," she added, typing slower. "He owned the mine, blamed the workers. No one cared because I was different." The words hit him like cold steel. Reed understood too well what it felt like when powerful people destroyed lives and called it just business. He had seen it across countless colonies. He wanted to say something, but instead he only wrote. "I'm sorry." Lyra smiled gently. "You don't have to be." She typed, "You listened. That's enough." Silence settled between them again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, almost warm. Mara reached out and placed her tiny hand on Lyra's metallic wrist device. Then she signed clumsily. The words were imperfect. But Lyra understood. "Thank you." Her eyes filled with emotion. She showed the girl how to sign it properly. Moving her fingers slowly so she could learn, Reed watched quietly. The two of them glowing in the reflection of the city lights. Outside, airships drifted across the horizon, their engines humming softly like distant thunder. Beyond the glass, the galactic city pulsed with neon light and endless motion. But inside that little café, everything slowed down. For a moment, Lyra forgot the pain, the mockery, the years of being alone. She looked at the human and his child, feeling something she hadn't felt since her family was alive, belonging. Reed noticed her gaze and typed, "You know, you don't have to eat alone again." Lyra smiled. "Is that an invitation?" She typed playfully. He grinned, maybe. Mara clapped her hands, not knowing what they said, but feeling the joy between them. Her laughter echoed softly, filling the café with something pure. When they finally left the café, Reed walked beside Lyra through the glowing streets of Vera. The air shimmered with floating lights and transparent bridges. Ships drifted above them like glowing whales. As they reached the crossroads, Lyra stopped, turning toward him. She typed one last message. "Thank you, Captain Reed, for standing up for me." He looked at her, then at his daughter, and replied, "You don't owe me thanks, Lyra. Just promise you'll never stay silent again." She smiled, her silver eyes bright with tears she didn't let fall. "I promise," she typed. And as she walked away into the mist of light and air, Reed watched her go. A quiet voice whispering in his heart that this meeting wasn't over. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew. Destiny wasn't always loud. Sometimes it began in silence. Days passed quietly after that night. The sky city of Vera kept glowing as always, filled with light, music, and noise. But for Lyra, something had changed. Every morning she remembered the human's words. "You don't have to stay silent again." She started to walk taller. She smiled more. She even went back to the same café, and this time people greeted her with respect. They whispered stories about the human who had faced a noble without fear. Meanwhile, Captain Reed worked at the shipyard near the lower docks, repairing damaged cargo crafts and patrol ships. His daughter Mara played near the repair bay, drawing small stars on her datapad and talking to Lyra through simple signs whenever she visited. It felt peaceful, almost normal, but deep inside, Reed knew something was coming. The galaxy never forgave those who embarrassed the powerful. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the floating towers, a shadow approached the shipyard gate. Tovin, the noble alien, stepped out of a black hovercar. His horns glowed faintly, and two tall armored guards followed him. Their armor reflected the sunset like blades. "Find the human," Tovin ordered coldly. "No one makes a fool of me." Reed was working under an engine when he heard the metallic footsteps. He rose slowly, wiping his hands. His eyes met Tovin's. Calm and unflinching, Tovin smiled cruelly. You think this is your world, human? You come to our city, insult our people, and act like a hero. Reed's voice was quiet. You humiliated yourself. I only stopped you. The noble's eyes narrowed. Arrogant till the end, he said, and signaled his guards before Reed could react. One of them swung a plasma staff. It hit the ground beside him, sending sparks flying. Mara screamed and ran behind a crate. Reed stepped in front of her instantly, his body shielding her from harm. Tovin laughed. Now let's see how brave you are when you're not in a café full of witnesses. But before the guards could strike again, a high-pitched hum filled the air. It grew stronger. Vibrating through the metal floor, Reed frowned, recognizing the sound. It wasn't a ship. It was resonance energy. From the shadows above, a bright pulse of blue light flashed. A figure dropped from the upper deck, landing between Reed and the guards. It was Lyra, wearing a dark combat suit with glowing stripes along her arms. Her hearing implants pulsed like twin stars. Tovin froze in shock. You! He spat. You dare interfere again? Lyra didn't speak. She raised her arm and pressed a button on her wrist. The air around her rippled like water. The ground vibrated as invisible waves of energy spread out. The guards staggered, their weapons shaking. Reed pulled Mara to safety and watched as Lyra fought. Her movements were sharp and fluid. Each strike was guided not by sound, but by vibration. She felt the rhythm of every heartbeat, the movement of every weapon. One guard charged, but she spun aside, slamming her hand into his chest. A burst of blue light threw him backward. His armor cracked, the hum fading into silence. The second guard tried to flank her, but Reed jumped in, swinging a metal wrench into the side of his helmet. The guard collapsed, the sound ringing across the yard like thunder. Tovin stumbled back, his confidence breaking. You think this means anything? He shouted. I'll have every authority in this city destroy you both. Lyra turned toward him, her eyes glowing bright silver. She raised her hand again, but Reed stopped her, placing his palm gently on her wrist. No, he said softly. Don't become like him. Her breath shook. She hesitated, then lowered her hand. Letting the energy fade, the silence that followed was deep, almost sacred. Tovin stepped back slowly, glaring. You'll regret this, human, and you, broken girl. You'll lose everything again. Reed looked at him calmly. Maybe, he said. But at least we'll lose with honor. City patrol drones arrived moments later, lights flashing. The guards were arrested. Tovin screamed for them to stop, claiming noble privilege. But this time the crowd didn't care. Many workers had seen the fight, and they cheered for Lyra and Reed as the patrol took Tovin away. Lyra stood beside Reed, breathing hard. The blue glow on her implants dimmed. Her hands shook slightly. Reed placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You okay? He asked, mouthing the words slowly so she could read. She nodded weakly, her lips curving into a small smile. I felt everything, she signed, every vibration, every step. And your heart too, Reed chuckled softly. I'll take that as a good thing. Mara ran to Lyra, hugging her legs tightly. You were amazing, she said, spelling the word with her small fingers. Lyra knelt down, her eyes soft. No, she signed back, we were. The sun disappeared behind the towers, the sky shifting to a deep violet glow above them. Terran ships floated in orbit like silent guardians. The wind carried a calm hum, almost like a heartbeat. Reed looked at Lyra, then at the sky. Seems like trouble follows us both, he said with a grin. Lyra smiled faintly. Then maybe we should stop running from it. And as night fell over the shining city, the human, the deaf alien, and the small child stood together under the flickering lights. Their shadows long, their silence strong. And the galaxy, for once, was listening. The next few days passed like a dream. The news about the deaf alien girl and the human who defied a noble spread through the floating city like fire. People whispered about it in cafes, in shuttle stations, and even in the crowded lower docks. They called her the silent fighter. And they called him the human with the steel eyes. For Lyra, life began to change. Strangers smiled when they saw her. Workers nodded with respect. Even children waved shyly at her on the streets. But most of all, she found herself thinking about Captain Red and his daughter Mara. One evening, the sky over Vera glowed with golden light. The floating platforms shimmered like stars. Lyra carried a small case in her hands and walked to the shipyard. Her steps were light, but her heart pounded. Reed was there, as always, fixing a damaged patrol engine, while Mara sat beside him drawing a picture of a ship. When he saw Lyra, he smiled. That quiet, calm smile that always made the world slow down. "You're early," he said, his voice gentle. Lyra smiled back and typed on her wrist screen, "I brought something for Mara." The little girl looked up excitedly. "For me?" she asked. Lyra nodded and opened the case. Inside was a small silver hearing implant, shaped like a delicate flower. Reed blinked, surprised. "Lyra, what is this?" She typed, "It's a prototype from my lab. It can help her hear small frequencies. Not all, but enough to know when someone calls her name." Mara's eyes widened. "Really?" she said softly. Reed felt his throat tighten. "You didn't have to," he said quietly. Lyra shook her head, her fingers moving in simple signs. "I wanted to." Reed knelt and carefully placed the implant behind Mara's ear. The device glowed gently. Then, for the first time in her life, Mara's eyes widened in shock. She could hear the soft hum of the shipyard engine. She gasped, turning toward the sound, and then toward Lyra. Tears filled her eyes as she signed. "I can hear." Reed's eyes glistened, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Thank you, Lyra." Lyra smiled, her silver eyes glowing in the evening light. "You helped me find my voice," she typed. "I only returned the favor." They stood there in silence. The kind of silence that didn't need words. Around them, the air was warm, filled with the soft hum of ships and distant chatter. Later that night, Reed invited her to dinner in their small quarters above the shipyard. The table was simple. 3 plates, a candle, and a bowl of stew. They laughed softly, shared stories through gestures and written words. And Mara giggled every time Lyra taught her a new sign. When the lights dimmed, Lyra looked out the window at the endless sky. Ships crossed the stars like fireflies. She thought of her lost family, her struggles, her silence, and how fate had brought her here, to a small home that finally felt like belonging. Reed noticed her quiet gaze. "You miss them," he said softly. She nodded. Every day, she typed. "But now, I'm not alone." He smiled gently. "You'll never be alone again." Mara leaned against Lyra's arm and signed clumsily. "Family." Lyra froze, her eyes filling with light. She placed her hand on Mara's shoulder and signed back. "Family." The candle flickered, the room glowing like a soft dream. Outside, the night deepened, the floating towers shining like stars in a vast ocean. Reed leaned back in his chair, his eyes calm. "You know," he said, "for a world that never stops talking, maybe the most powerful thing we can do is listen." Lyra smiled. "Yes," she typed, "and sometimes silence speaks louder than sound." The 3 of them sat together, the human, the alien, and the child, their laughter soft, their hearts connected by the same invisible melody, one that needed no voice. As the camera pans upward, the city glows below. Terran ships drift across the starlit sky, and a calm voice narrates, in a galaxy filled with noise, humanity didn't conquer with words or war. They conquered with compassion, with courage, and with the power to listen. And under that endless sky, a deaf alien girl found her family. A human father found his peace, and together, in silence, they spoke the loudest truth of all.